It began with a moment so sharp, so unexpectedly cruel, that it cut through the noise of the entire room and carved itself straight into my memory. 1 second, everything around me felt ordinary, people talking, laughing, moving through their routines, and the next second, his voice rose just enough to catch everyone's attention. It wasn't what he said alone, but the way he said it, with that subtle smirk, that calculated pause, and that confidence that comes only when someone believes they have the upper hand. He wanted an audience. He wanted witnesses. He wanted to watch me sink into embarrassment while he stood above it all, pretending it was nothing more than a joke. But humiliation, when delivered publicly, is never just a joke. It's a performance, and in that moment, I realized I was being positioned as the spectacle. For a split second, everything in me froze. I felt the weight of all the eyes shifting toward me, some out of curiosity, some out of expectation, and some out of that quiet, uncomfortable guilt people feel when witnessing something they know isn't right but can't bring themselves to interrupt. And there he stood, appearing so casual, so relaxed, as if humiliating someone was just an effortless part of his personality. The room didn't go silent, but it felt like my internal world did. The words replayed in my head with exaggerated clarity, every syllable landing harder than it had the first time, not because of their meaning alone, but because of the intention woven into them. I remember noticing the smallest details, the way his eyebrows lifted as if inviting others to enjoy the moment, the way a few people exchanged glances and subtly shook their heads, the way someone else pretended not to hear even though they clearly did. People underestimate how deeply humiliation can sting, especially when it is crafted in such a way that it appears lighthearted on the surface. That's what makes it dangerous. When someone tries to bring you down publicly under the disguise of humor or casual disrespect, it becomes harder to respond without looking overly sensitive or defensive, and that's exactly the trap he thought I'd fall into. My heart reacted before my mind did. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, that rush of heat to the face that comes when you're caught between anger and disbelief. It wasn't just the insult itself, it was the arrogance behind it, the certainty in his expression that I would swallow the moment quietly, that I would accept the embarrassment as part of the social atmosphere he controlled. And as the seconds stretched, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. Rage is too wild, too unfocused. It was clarity, a sharp realization of what this moment truly represented. He wasn't just attacking my dignity, he was testing the boundaries of what he could get away with. I watched the reactions around me, not because I cared what they thought, but because their reactions revealed so much about the environment he believed he owned. A few laughed, soft nervous laughs that didn't reach their eyes. A few stayed completely neutral, choosing the safest place, the middle. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Each response told me something about the kind of stage I was standing on, a stage he thought belonged to him, a stage he believed he could use to elevate himself by lowering someone else. Humiliation delivered in public is never an accident. It's deliberate. It's a performance crafted to shift power from one person to another, a way of placing someone in a position where they must decide whether to shrink or stand. I stood there, absorbing the moment fully, analyzing every detail not as a victim, but as someone who was silently measuring the true nature of the person in front of me. And in that instant, I saw something he didn't expect me to see. Behind his attempt to ridicule me was insecurity, a desperate need to be perceived as dominant, a hunger for validation masked under confident gestures. People who try to humiliate others rarely do it from a place of strength, they do it from a place of fear. Fear that someone else might outshine them, fear that someone else might rise higher than they anticipated. He tried to turn me into an easy target, assuming I would meet humiliation with silence, that I would lower my gaze, that I would laugh it off just to blend back into the crowd. But instead of shrinking, I paid attention to the nuances, the hesitation in his eyes right after he delivered the final blow of his comment, the brief flicker of uncertainty when he noticed I wasn't reacting the way he assumed I would. Bullies thrive on predictable responses. When you don't give them the reaction they're fishing for, something shifts in the air. And in that moment, I could feel that shift beginning, subtle but unmistakable, like the first distant rumble of a storm forming somewhere beyond the horizon. The shift from shock to determination didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, almost invisibly, the way a single spark catches on dry wood without anyone noticing until the flame has already begun to grow. Right after the moment of humiliation, when the noise around me slowly returned to its normal rhythm, I could still feel the echo of what had happened lingering in the air. My mind replayed his words over and over, not because I wanted to, but as the shock began to fade, as the heat in my chest settled into something more controlled, I realized I wasn't sinking. I wasn't folding. Something inside me was waking up, a part of me that had been quiet for too long, a part that didn't rise out of anger, but out of clarity. There comes a point where you recognize that staying silent isn't humility, it's surrender. And I could feel that recognition sharpening inside me, like a lens coming into focus after being blurred for too long. I watched him casually move on with the conversation, laughing with others as if nothing important had happened. That was the moment I understood his mistake. He thought the shock would paralyze me, keep me in a state where I couldn't process what to do next. But instead, it reminded me of every other time someone tried to underestimate me, every moment in my past when I stayed quiet to avoid conflict, every insult I swallowed just to keep the peace. All of those memories rose up, forming a kind of silent army behind me, reminding me that this moment wasn't isolated, it was a pattern that had finally reached its breaking point. The determination didn't come loudly. It arrived like a slow, steady tightening of resolve, a calm sense of certainty that built with each breath I took. I realized I wasn't angry at the words themselves, I was angry because he believed he had the right to speak to me that way. That belief was what needed to be shattered. People like him depend on others staying weak, staying quiet, staying predictable. They rely on the shock lasting long enough for them to walk away victorious. But I wasn't going to give him that comfort. As the determination grew, I started noticing things I hadn't before, the way his confidence seemed exaggerated, almost forced, the way he glanced around to check if others were still reacting, the way he couldn't fully meet my eyes once he realized the shock was wearing off. Determination gives you a new kind of vision. It allows you. I began replaying not his words, but the intention behind them. What was he trying to achieve? What did humiliating me do for him? It was then that I understood something crucial. His attempt wasn't random, it wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. He wanted control. He wanted dominance. He wanted to display a kind of social power at my expense. But what he didn't realize was that moments like this don't break people like me. They build something far more dangerous, clarity. I felt myself shift internally, like a door unlocking in my mind. The shock had done its job, it revealed the truth about the situation. And now, determination was stepping in, ready to take over, ready to reshape the narrative he thought he had already written for me. Instead of shrinking, I found myself analyzing the moment as if it belonged to someone else. I wasn't just reacting, I was observing, planning, understanding. Determination is powerful because it isn't impulsive. It doesn't rush. It sits quietly, gathering strength. By then, my breathing had steadied, my posture had straightened, and the weight of the moment no longer felt like something pressing down on me, but something pushing me forward. What he intended as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something entirely different. It had become a catalyst, a turning point, the spark that forced me to look at myself not as a target, but as someone capable of shifting the balance completely. And as this shift continued deep within me, as determination replaced shock piece by piece, I knew something had changed permanently. He didn't just create a moment of disrespect, he awakened the part of me that no longer tolerated it, the part that was ready to take back control in a way he never expected, the part that understood this wasn't just about responding, it was about redefining the entire direction of what would come next. I began replaying not his words, but the intention behind them. What was he trying to achieve? What did humiliating me do for him? It was then that I understood something crucial, his attempt wasn't random, it wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. He wanted control. He wanted dominance. He wanted to display a kind of social power at my expense. But what he didn't realize was that moments like this don't break people like me. They build something far more dangerous: clarity. I felt myself shift internally, like a door unlocking in my mind. The shock had done its job, it revealed the truth about the situation. And now, determination was stepping in, ready to take over, ready to reshape the narrative he thought he had already written for me. Instead of shrinking, I found myself analyzing the moment as if it belonged to someone else. I wasn't just reacting, I was observing, planning, understanding. Determination is powerful because it isn't impulsive. It doesn't rush. It sits quietly, gathering strength. By then, my breathing had steadied, my posture had straightened, and the weight of the moment no longer felt like something pressing down on me, but something pushing me forward. What he intended as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something entirely different. It had become a catalyst, a turning point, the spark that forced me to look at myself not as a target, but as someone capable of shifting the balance completely. And as this shift continued deep within me, as determination replaced shock piece by piece, I knew something had changed permanently. He didn't just create a moment of disrespect, he awakened the part of me that no longer tolerated it, the part that was ready to take back control in a way he never expected, the part that understood this wasn't just about responding, it was about redefining the entire direction of what would come next. I started to think about what might have pushed him to choose that specific moment. The timing was too perfect to be accidental. He waited until the room was filled, until conversations were loud enough to mask the malice but quiet enough for everyone nearby to hear the punchline. He waited until he had people around him who he believed would support his behavior with laughter or at least with silence. He chose a moment when I had no idea I was walking into a trap. That meant he had thought about this in advance, maybe not the exact words, but the opportunity itself. He wanted the humiliation to land publicly because he wanted to create a shift in how people saw me, a shift that would benefit him. Once I realized that, everything else fell into place. The motive wasn't just confidence. It was insecurity mixed with jealousy, wrapped in ego, fueled by fear. Perhaps he felt threatened. Perhaps he saw something in me he wished he had. Or maybe he simply couldn't stand the idea that I might be respected more than he was. People like him often operate from a scarcity mindset, the belief that someone else's shine diminishes their own. So instead of improving themselves, they try to dim others. His behavior also revealed something else: he believed he understood me. He believed he could predict my reaction, that I would feel small enough to stay quiet, embarrassed enough to laugh it off, or intimidated enough to avoid confronting him. He thought he had me figured out. And that assumption, that underestimation, was another motive in itself. He enjoyed the idea of having power over someone he considered predictable. People who underestimate you often do so because they need to feel superior in order to feel stable. And superiority built on imagined hierarchy isn't strength, it's desperation. I also started noticing the subtle shift in his expression when he realized I wasn't reacting the way he expected. That tiny flash of doubt, that brief moment where his eyes darted away, revealed more truth than his words ever could. It was then that I understood his deepest motive: control. He wanted to control the narrative, control the perception, control the environment around him. But control built on humiliating others is fragile. It only works when the other person submits to it, when they let the moment define them. The more I analyzed the situation, the more empowered I became. Not because I was planning a reaction yet, but because I understood the truth behind his actions. Knowledge is power, and understanding someone's motives strips away the illusion of their strength. What he did wasn't an act of superiority, it was an act of fear disguised as confidence. His attempt to belittle me wasn't a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of his insecurity. And once I recognized that, once I fully understood what drove him, the humiliation he intended for me transformed into a revelation, a moment that revealed exactly who he was and exactly why his attempt to bring me down was destined to fail. Building the strategic plan to reclaim my dignity and power wasn't about reacting impulsively or letting emotions guide me. It began with silence, not the silence of shock this time, but the silence of calculation. After understanding his motives and seeing the patterns that led to that moment, I realized that responding immediately would only give him what he wanted. People like him thrive on chaos, on quick reactions, on the kind of emotional outburst that makes you look unstable while they pretend to stand calm and collected. So the first part of my plan was patience. Not hesitation, not fear, patience. A deliberate, controlled pause that allowed me to look at the situation from every angle before deciding my next step. I started watching him more closely, not with anger, but with a precision he never expected. Every interaction, every comment, every time he shifted between confidence and insecurity, I studied it. If he wanted to turn this into a game of power, then I needed to understand the game better than he did. Strategy is built on observation. While he believed the moment had passed, I was quietly gathering information: how he behaved when he thought he had the upper hand, how he reacted when he felt threatened, how he relied on others to validate his actions. I noticed how he performed more loudly when surrounded by people he thought admired him, and how he became quieter around those who intimidated him. These details mattered, because knowing someone's triggers is the foundation of reclaiming control. The next part of the plan was clarity. I needed to understand exactly what I wanted, not from him, but from myself. Did I want an apology? No. People like him don't apologize sincerely, and even if they do, it's a performance meant to protect their image. Did I want revenge? Not the petty kind. Not the kind that mirrors his behavior. I wanted something different. I wanted restoration of dignity, the kind that doesn't require shouting, scenes, or theatrics. I wanted to reclaim the narrative he tried to twist. And most importantly, I wanted to ensure he would never feel comfortable trying to humiliate me again, nor anyone else who he thought wouldn't fight back. With clarity came precision. I began planning not just what I would do, but when. Timing is everything in situations like this. Striking too early makes you look desperate. Striking too late gives them the advantage of rewriting the story. I had to choose the right moment, one where he least expected a response, one where the environment would amplify the impact of my actions without me having to raise my voice. The key was to flip the dynamic he created. If he wanted an audience for my humiliation, then the moment. I started by strengthening my presence. Not in an aggressive way, but through quiet confidence. I spoke with more authority in conversations, carried myself with a steadiness that made people pay attention, made decisions without waiting for approval, and refused to shrink in his presence. The goal wasn't to provoke him. The goal was to remind him, and everyone else, that my value was not determined by a single moment or by his attempt to belittle me. Confidence is infectious. When you begin to rise, people notice, and those who once stayed neutral begin shifting their perception. I didn't need to confront him directly to change the atmosphere. I needed to change the way others saw me, and in doing so, change the way they saw him. The more I reclaimed my space, the more uneasy he became. I saw it in the way he watched me from a distance, trying to figure out why his attempt hadn't worked the way he planned. He expected silence, withdrawal, discomfort. Instead, he saw strength, clarity, and a kind of poised determination that made him question whether he had underestimated the wrong person. That uncertainty in him was the first sign that the power balance was shifting. But I didn't rush. Strategy requires patience, especially when you're dealing with someone fueled by ego. The core of the plan was simple: let him reveal himself. People who humiliate others will eventually slip. They can only maintain their facade for so long before their true nature breaks through. And when he slipped, when he made another careless attempt to undermine me, not as publicly, but with the same intention, I was ready. Not with anger, not with emotion, but with precision. I responded with calm strength, a strength that didn't attack him directly but dismantled his confidence. I presented facts, clarity, and composure so sharp that it left no room for misinterpretation. I didn't humiliate him, I exposed him. Not by shouting, but by showing the room exactly who he was and exactly who I. In that controlled response, everything shifted. The room that once watched my humiliation now watched something entirely different. They watched me reclaim myself, not through revenge that mirrored his cruelty, but through strength he never expected. And in that moment, he realized the truth he had overlooked from the beginning. I was never the easy target he imagined. I was the quiet force he never saw coming, the one who didn't need noise to make an impact, the one who used strategy instead of impulse, control instead of chaos, and dignity instead of fear. The moment everything turned wasn't loud, dramatic, or chaotic the way people imagine turning points to be. It didn't come with shouting, confrontation, or public scenes. In fact, it happened so quietly that most people around us didn't even realize anything significant was unfolding. But he realized it. He felt it. And that was enough. The shift began the second he sensed that the control he once believed he had over the situation was slipping through his fingers, not because of anything he said, but because of everything he expected and didn't receive. He entered the room that day with the same confidence he always carried, the kind that wasn't real confidence but the performance of it. He believed that the moment he tried to humiliate me had secured his position above me, as if he had successfully written a permanent definition of who I was supposed to be. People like him rely on the illusion that once they diminish someone, that person stays diminished. He assumed the story he crafted would stick. But when he walked in and saw me standing tall, speaking with the same authority and calm certainty he thought he had taken from me, something changed in his expression. It wasn't fear at first, just confusion. A small crack in the mask he wore. The real turning point wasn't a single action, it was a series of subtle shifts. The way conversations flowed differently now, the way people were listening when I SPO. As he walked closer, I watched him carefully, not with intimidation but with clarity. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the internal struggle to understand why the dynamic felt different. He tried to act as if nothing had changed, but people can't hide what they feel when their sense of control starts slipping. He tried to speak with the same tone, the same forced humor, the same attempts at subtle dominance, but the energy behind it was different. It lacked conviction. It lacked the sharpness it once had. And the moment he realized I wasn't responding the way he expected, the moment he felt the silence of his own power echoing back at him, something inside him shifted. He made a small joke directed at me, not as bold as the last one, not as calculated, but still meant to test if he could push me down again. And that was the moment everything turned, not because of the joke itself, but because of the way I met it. I didn't laugh awkwardly. I didn't shrink. I didn't avoid it. I responded with calm, with clarity, with a confidence so steady it cut deeper than any insult ever could. I answered him with truth, not aggression. I corrected the false narrative he tried to revive, not with emotion, but with precision. And in that quiet, controlled moment, he felt it, the power returning to its rightful place. It wasn't what I said that changed everything. It was how I said it. People underestimate the power of composure, the impact of speaking without fear, the strength of standing firmly in yourself without raising your voice. My words were simple, but they stripped him of the comfort he had been relying on. The room shifted, subtly but undeniably, as people watched the exchange unfold. No one reacted immediately, but the silence said enough. Silence can be louder than applause. Silence can reveal truths that words try to hide. And in that silence, he realized he was no longer in control of the story. His face changed, not dramatically, but in small, telling ways, the tightening of his jaw, the forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, the quick intake of breath that gave away the shock he tried to suppress. The moment he realized I wasn't the same person he expected, that I wasn't playing the role he wrote for me, was the moment he lost his sense of superiority. He wasn't facing the version of me he tried to humiliate. He was facing the version of me that had risen from that humiliation with a clarity he didn't possess. The people around us noticed too. They watched him struggle to recover, to regain the ease he once had, but it was already gone. Power, when lost, doesn't return easily. And the moment he realized others saw it too, the moment he sensed they weren't laughing with him anymore, that was when the real turning point solidified. He wasn't the one shaping the atmosphere anymore. He wasn't the one deciding the tone. His influence, the one he had relied on so heavily, was slipping beneath his feet. He tried to move on quickly, to shift the conversation, to pretend the moment didn't matter. But his voice lacked the confidence it once had. His posture had changed. His energy had shifted. And even though he didn't admit it, even though he tried to mask it, he knew something irreversible had happened. He had lost the one thing he valued most, the illusion of control. And while the world around him continued as if nothing extraordinary had taken place, he felt the truth settle inside him with a heaviness he couldn't shake, a truth that would haunt him far longer than any direct confrontation ever could. The final outcome began revealing itself long before anyone spoke about it out loud. It didn't come in a single moment of triumph, but in a series of quiet shifts that grew stronger each day. Strength doesn't always announce itself through confrontation. Sometimes it shows up through presence, through the way you walk into a room, through the way conversations begin to tilt in your direction without you having to force them. The power he once believed he had started dissolving slowly, not because of anything dramatic I did, but because of everything he failed to anticipate. People started noticing the difference first. They noticed the steadiness in my voice, the confidence in my posture, the grounded way I communicated without ever raising my tone. They noticed how I didn't flinch around him anymore, how I didn't shrink or hesitate or let him occupy unnecessary space in my mind. And most importantly, they noticed how he reacted to that shift. The same person who once confidently tried to belittle me now stumbled slightly in conversations, hesitated before making jokes, and constantly watched my reactions as if trying to predict something he no longer understood. His certainty about who I was had been shattered, and without that certainty, the power dynamic he built could no longer hold itself up. The change became obvious not because I tried to prove anything, but because the truth always reveals itself slowly and undeniably. People started seeking my perspective more often, trusting my words, paying attention to what I said. They didn't do it as an act of loyalty, they did it because confidence pulls people in naturally. When you speak with clarity and calmness, people listen without needing to be told. And the more they listened to me, the less they were drawn toward him. It wasn't a competition, it was a shift in energy. People gravitate toward what feels steady, and stability has a presence that arrogance can never replicate. Meanwhile, he tried harder to maintain the image he once wore with ease. He told louder jokes, laughed a little too strongly, inserted himself into conversations with a forced enthusiasm that didn't match the atmosphere. But the more he tried, the more unsettled he became, because trying is something he never had to do before. He was used to attention following him effortlessly, used to people mirroring his energy, used to being the loudest voice in the room. But now, even when he raised his voice, the room didn't respond the way it used to. Strength has a way of shifting the balance quietly, and he could feel the imbalance forming under his feet. The outcome also showed itself in the way he interacted with me. The man who once looked at me with a smug sense of superiority now carried a subtle caution in his eyes, a carefulness in how he spoke, as if measuring his words. He greeted me differently, not warmly, not kindly, but respectfully in the most reluctant way possible. Respect born from fear isn't genuine respect, but it is recognition. Recognition of what he couldn't ignore anymore. Recognition of a strength he never expected me to possess. Recognition of the fact that the version of me he had crafted in his mind no longer existed. I could see how much it unsettled him. His body language revealed it more than anything he said. The man who once leaned forward with confidence now leaned back, arms crossed, trying to create distance. The man who once interrupted freely now paused before speaking. The man who once expected me to shrink now avoided situations where my presence threatened to overshadow him. Strength, when it grows steadily and quietly, becomes impossible to challenge without exposing your own weaknesses. And he knew that confronting me again, or trying to humiliate me a second time, would only expose the truth he was desperately trying to hide. He wasn't the strong one. He never had been. The final outcome also showed in the atmosphere between us. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't the same careless familiarity either. It was something heavier, something defined by unspoken acknowledgement. He knew the power dynamic had changed, and I knew he knew. That understanding lingered between us like a silent boundary he didn't dare cross again. People gradually started noticing how differently he behaved around me, how the confidence he once weaponized now softened whenever I entered the room. They noticed the shift, even if they didn't speak about it openly. But the real change wasn't in him or in them, it was in me. I felt a steadiness I hadn't felt before, a kind of internal certainty that didn't depend on external validation or confrontation. I realized that true power isn't about proving someone wrong in front of others, it's about becoming someone who cannot be shaken by the wrongs others do. My voice didn't need to be louder, it needed to be grounded. My presence didn't need to dominate, it only needed to be unwavering. And that is what changed everything. The outcome wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about embarrassing him publicly or giving him a taste of his own medicine. It was about showing him, without trying, that he could no longer define me, diminish me, or stand above me by pushing me down. It was about making him realize that the person he tried to humiliate had transformed into someone he could neither mock nor control. Strength doesn't announce itself with noise, it settles quietly into place, and once it does, the entire atmosphere shifts around it in ways that can't be undone.